Okay, well, I think we can go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to the May meeting. I have some announcements. We have visitors. As Kelly mentioned, we have Kathy Cook from the Bloomington Normal MQG, and we have Peggy Beeman from Atlanta. I hope I'm saying your name right. She is showing up as Roswell Quilts on the attendees list. Welcome, you guys. That's the kind of the fun thing about doing this online is we get to have visitors from all over, not just within driving distance. So that's kind of fun. I guess most of you have heard this year, well, no, next year's Modern Quilt Guild QuiltCon is going to be virtual. I was super excited to have it in Atlanta. It's going to be so close that I could drive down, but I'm sure they'll bring it back to Atlanta in a few years. I know not 2021, but 2022, they've already got that contract signed, so it won't be 2022. Maybe it'll be 2023. So fingers crossed for that. Let's see what we have. Dues, if you have not paid dues, they are $25 to Pat Barber. You can email us and I will send you her address. And we have Challenge Quilt Reveal is in July. So if you haven't started, there's plenty of time. You've got like 2 months. So go ahead and open your bags and get started on those quilts if you haven't. I know some of you have finished. I haven't. Mine is pieced, but I think I'm going to edit it some more. A quilt is never really done, I feel like. You can always go back and rip out seams, add stuff. So I've bound and rebound quilts like 2 or 3 times till I get it like I want it. But anyways, today's meeting, insert strips and shapes with Kelly Spell and Audrey Workman. And then we're going to do a show and tell, as Kelly mentioned. Next month is how to make paper piecing patterns. I'm going to teach y'all how to do that. And it's going to mostly be a slideshow. So I guess I need to get started on that class because I haven't started it yet. But it's going to be awesome too. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to be reading questions and answers. As Kelly mentioned, I see we've already had 1 question. Okay.
I answered it. Karen was asking if you're typing in the chat, there should be an option on your device. It will be a drop-down menu that says you can send a message to panelists, all panelists. You can send a message to all panelists and attendees, and then I think you can send a message to individual people. But if you want everyone to see it, you want to send your message to all panelists and attendees.
Sorry, I didn't get switched over there to your face.
That's okay. No worries.
This is a little bit different. I'm actually video directing this, so I'm picking which video that you all see. It's not doing it automatically because we've got some great shots of like cutting boards and glues and tools. So anyways, I'm having to do that. So if there's a little lag, please pardon me. Okay, I think that's all. For our announcements, if you have a meeting layout suggestion, please let us know. We're always excited to improve. So you can just shoot us an email. Now, does anybody have any questions or comments that you can type to us before we get started? Did we just lose a camera?
Yeah, I'm having technical difficulties.
Oh, is that you, Kelly? Okay. Well, we're going to start with Audrey. So let's see. Patty Ann.
I have a question before we go. Patty Ann asks, what about our plan to hang out challenge quilts at the art gallery in Dalton?
Yeah, the Dalton Creative Arts Guild is currently closed. So my guess is that will not be happening. I will contact Savannah and make sure. And then I can send you all an email and let you know. This year's just weird. It's hopefully there's not another year like it in our lifetime. But I'm sure we can get together with them. Maybe next year they'll have an opening that we can slide into. Okay, so now let's get started. Audrey Workman is going to lead us. I'm going to make her the spotlight video. So get ready. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Yay!
Hi, everybody.
Yes.
this is my contraption for the camera that is showing the cutting mat. And so I looked at my face a little while ago and I thought, oh, I'm level-headed because I have my phone resting on my spirit level. Kelly has a display of things that she is going to show you and discuss with you, tools that she is using, and I see her glue bottle there. My glue bottle is very similar. We use the same kind of glue. She has a tip that has a metal point. I have tried that one, but I continually clog it up. So I've gone back to the old plastic pointed one. I unclog it pretty much daily with a pin. It's not a problem. So I use that. I'm talking about insetting strips. And one of the things that you're going to see while I work is that most of my strips are going to have folded in seam allowances. So I'm using just a bias tape maker. They come in many sizes. And what I've learned is you don't have to put a bias strip in a bias straight tape maker to have it come out as a bias strip. You can use a straight strip also. A long pin will help you get your fabric through the channel to come out. All it does is it bends in both seam allowances evenly, and that's a really handy thing. Fabric markers, you will see that in some cases I'm drawing lines with a lead pencil. That's because they will never be seen. Just be careful. Y'all know all about all that stuff. And the other thing I'm going to be using today is a zipper foot. When Kelly uses a zipper foot, you'll see a better zipper foot, but it really doesn't matter for what I'm doing. This is my Juki normal piecing foot. I'll say you might want to use a 1/4 inch foot at some point in time. This is an old Bernina regular piecing foot, and I'll be telling you at the time which foot is handy and why it is handy. Also, when I sew for you today, I'm going to be doing this down an already sewn seam allowance because I'm not high tech. All right. So first I want to talk about, a lot of you will have this book. Before I was in the guild in Chattanooga, people were using examples from this book and sewing up patterns from this book or trying these techniques. So for some of you, this will be really familiar. The first question you may have is, if I'm going to inset a strip, why don't I just cut my fabric apart and set it in? And you can certainly do that. This quilt, if you own the book, sorry about that spotlight. If you own the book, it's on page 93. This is a quilt. You can see the blocks are separate. And it's by Jackie Gehring and Katie Peterson. And what they recommend that you do is you sew in wedges in a normal pieced way. And then you're going to cross them. And they tell you when you cross them, you only want to cross them with straight strips. So this method is going to limit what you're able to do with strips. So if you want to try that, pardon my technical slowness, you just start out with a square of fabric, mark where you want to put your strips. You can audition them beforehand. That is a wedge. This is a wedge. They don't look all that wedgy. And this one is straight. And you're going to slice apart on your lines. You remember, people, that we were planning to do this in person. So it looks a little strange. So I'm going to sew them in. And I want to tell you about why I have sewn a line across the top of my background fabric. When we get to the fourth thing I do today, if Candace doesn't need, and Candace, if you need to cut me off and say that's more than your fair share of the time, I will not be offended. But one thing Kathleen Loomis, who we will get to eventually, recommends that you do is before you get started, when you're inserting a lot of strips, sew a line across the top of your fabric so you're always going to know which side is the top. And if you're putting together things with a lot of strips and wedges, it can get very confusing. And if it's important to you to retain the top as the top, this is a very good way to do it. So I've split this up. I've got my strips to sew in, and voila, here they are sewn in. All right, now what I want to do is I want to cross it. This is a black straight strip which has the seam allowances already folded under. I ran it through my bias tape maker. It is not bias, and I'm just auditioning. And it looks like I can put this in and I can, without having any problem. This is a green wedge, and I've done two things to this green wedge. I've pressed the seam allowances over, but before I did that, Kelly will also talk to you about stay stitching. If you make clothes, when you're sewing around something like a collar or an arm side or anything that might end up stretching before you finish putting it together, they will recommend that you stay stitch. And stay stitching is a line of stitches that is inside where you plan to put your seam allowance. So mine is at 3/16 of an inch, simply because when I put the seam right inside this foot, it measures 3/16 of an inch. It's not magic. I'm guiding off of a foot. On my sewing machine, I have it set with the tension to be really good when I'm sewing 2 layers of fabric together. If you're stay stitching, you're sewing only through one layer of fabric, and you might end up getting puckers. If you cannot instantly take those out by pressing with your iron, just take your seam ripper and about every inch pop a seam open and then iron it. They'll stay in place. It will make no difference at all. It'll just keep things from being puckered. Okay, so this is what I want to end up with. And the question is, if I'm slicing and inserting, can I do that? And the answer is, well, it'll cause you a lot of trouble. So, okay, so for the top one, I've gone ahead and I've sewn in the top half of my black seam allowance, and I've turned under the seam allowance on the bottom half of that. And I know that I'm going to be matching it up to this line, this blue line. Can you see the blue line? It's faint. The blue line is 1/4 inch down from that seam.
Yes, we can see that.
Thank you. So I'm going to put my seam allowance over here, and you can see I can shift that thing back and forth, but to make it match up, I have to work to have it match up. And I'm going to try to match the red because it's in the middle. And even when I'm matching the red, if I put a straight edge on it, you can see my blue's a little crazy. My yellow is starting to bend. So I'm already going to have a little bit of trouble. Now, you know, in the book that I just showed you, everything they put in was black, and that's going to hide a lot of wonkiness. But so I did bright different colors just so you can see the disasters that are impending. With the wedge shape, I have marked with disappearing, well, water-soluble ink across the line, matching up. If I have my line continue from where it was above, it'll go through at that line. But when I do the same thing and I try to put this where I'm going to match the seam allowance, I would liken this to light refraction, as if you're looking at a wooden post sticking up out of the lake, and on top of the post is vertical and underneath it bends. Look how you get a good leg on that yellow one and the blue one. So this is why, and here's one all sewn together, where the refraction at the top, I worked really hard to keep these things straight. They're not straight. And that is why we use different methods for sewing inset strips. So the first one I'm going to tell you about is Hillary Goodwin. She blogs and Instagrams at Entropy Always Wins. Kelly and I are going to have all this stuff on a PDF that you can read later. It'll be on our website, so you don't need to write anything down right now. These are just my notes, so I'll remember to tell you everything you need to know. Okay, Hillary won a big prize at QuiltCon last year. Kelly, do you remember which one it was? No. Okay, she won a big prize. She had a quilt that looked like pickup sticks. If you remember that game from childhood where you drop all the sticks down and they're all crossing each other, they're everywhere. And she made that quilt with this particular technique. As you can see, you can do straight lines, you can do curves. With curves, you will use bias, it's essential. But you can make a good pile of things crossing other things. There's not going to be an offset. Everything you put in stays straight because you are not going to cut the back until you put the front in. It's like magic. You can insert wedges. I've done that. I'll show you on my show and tell today where I inserted a big curve of a flock of flying geese. So you can layer them, obviously. And if you do a very skinny strip, it's difficult. So I'll show you another way you can put those in. It's a little more complicated than slash and insert, but not if you're trying to be accurate. And you're not losing anything in your background fabric. On slash and insert, as you well know, every time you slice and put something in, you lose things or you gain things. This one, I started out with an 8-inch square of fabric and it ended up a little shorter, about 7.5, and a little wider, about 8.5. Kind of like people, as they go through time, they end up a little shorter and wider. That's what's happening if you do slash and insert. But if you do the insert strips, you're going to retain your original size. That's the beauty of the thing. Okay, so how in the world? All right, so let's see. First, you decide where are you going to put it. And I want to put it like I'm going across here. So you're going to draw a line where you want to sew. As you can tell, you're going to put this whole thing in your sewing machine. You will not be able to guide off of your throat plate markings on your machine. So you need to have a line where you're going to put it. Let's just say we're going to put it down here. So draw a line. And that line is going to show me where I line up my seam allowance. Which one do I want to line up? If I line up the one on this side, then the whole strip is going to flip over and be within my background. If I line up this side, it's going to be cutting it pretty close to that corner. So I'm going to go by this side. And I tend to just hold it as I go along and make little micro adjustments as necessary. I'm going to sew 1/4 inch from the seam. I have it folded just to see what it looks like when I test. That's certainly not essential. I would recommend that you go ahead and have your second edge pre-folded because it's going to make your life easier in a few minutes. You can pin this down. You can put dots. And I mean, when I say dots, I mean small dots. I mean, let's see if it's alive today. That is the maximum you want because you don't want to have to deal with a lot of glue in your work. All right, get that out. Sew the thing down. Okay, this is what it looks like sewn on one edge. Your next job is to fold over the other edge at 1/4 inch. And that's why I like to pre-fold it, because taking this whole thing over to the ironing board is a little harder to me. Plus I can see exactly what it's going to look like before I even start. All right, we're going to glue it. I'll give you some real-time glue. Candace, turn on your camera and scream at me. I have no idea how long I'm taking. So you're in charge of letting me know if this is taking too long. You're going to glue it, turn it over, and press. Of course, you want to press this with your iron, and I mean press. I do not mean iron. You want to heat set it. That needs to stick down. It's essential. Okay, then, okay, this one is set. The thing that you want to see is on the back side. So this is the line of stitches. I apologize profusely. I made them light green without thinking. I've drawn a line in 1/4 inch from my existing, the seam that I just sewed a minute ago before I put the glue on the thing. And that is going to show me where to cut. So you actually have to take your scissors. You can't use a rotary on this for hopefully very obvious reasons. You'll slash your strip in half. Slice that open with your scissors. Then when you turn it and open it up, it looks like I've cheated and already sewn this one. How could I have done that? Oh no, I apologize. I see what I did. This is where I had it pre-folded and stay stitched. It's going to give me a line with which to sew. You're going to sew on the second line. I was right the first time. I apologize. I was right the first time. I've marked a line here to sew, but you can sew wherever you want to sew. And when you finish, you're going to trim it. And when you open it up, this one's not actually sewn. When you open it up, you're going to have a good straight strip. This is the one that I just glued on the last example, and it's not sewn yet. So I have a line at 1/4 inch because I can't guide. If I wanted to go ahead and cut that off so that I can sew right along this seam and guide off of that with my normal foot, which I have already lost, I'm going to sew along the seam. I mean the fold. If you can't see the fold, then mark the fold before you start sewing. I'm sorry, that was a little awkward, wasn't it? Hopefully it'll get better. Okay, then here's the last one. It's sewn on both sides. I've trimmed it. I have pressed my seam allowances to the center, and I'm ready for my next strip. Can I do a curve? Well, as you already saw in the example, yes, I can do a curve. This is bias, it's a little stretchy. I can run it through my magic tool. I'm not going to take the time to do that right now and have the seam allowances folded in, but I'm going to just suggest a couple of things. One is that when you're practicing this and testing it at home, try to take your curve off of opposite edges while you're learning, because you know when you're making a drunkard's path block, you have to have, most people will use a template. If you're Kathy Cook, you will not. Welcome, welcome, Kathy Cook. But you have your top curve and your bottom curve as two templates, and you have to match the edge. When you're doing this method, learn on something that's gentle. And here's what it would look like. This is a piece of leftover actual quilt binding, so it's very thick, but you can have it curve pretty well going from edge to edge. And I'm saying opposite edges as opposed to a really tight curve, which you don't want to learn on the tight curve. You want to learn on something easier. So try it on the opposite edges. All right. That's all for Hillary's method. The next method we're going to talk about is Stephanie Rule from Spontaneous Threads. She has a blog and an Instagram, and she is showing you how to put in very skinny 1/8 inch inserts into your background fabric. You can do straight lines, you can do curves, you can cut across. Probably you could do wedges, but it would take some thinking. Let's see. Oh, good. Kelly's giving you information. Thank you, Kelly. I was looking to see if there was a question, but it was just Kelly. Okay. You do have offsets. There's not really anything you can do because in this method, you're going to fold and insert. So let's get started. You have a piece of background fabric, and you decide where you want to put your insert. You fold it and you press it with an iron. Then you're going to take this to your sewing machine and you are going to baste 1/4 inch from the edge of your fold. The more space you allow yourself for basting, the better it will be when you're putting the strip in, but you'll lose more of your background. So if your background is pieced or something, you don't want to lose any of it. So you have to make a judgment call on that. Okay, this one is basted in. And then as soon as you get it basted in, you want to press it, and then you're going to trim off the edge. In this one, I trimmed the edge with the same scissors. I just got in there and cut along the fold so I wouldn't lose anything. With the next one, I trimmed it off with a rotary cutter, and you can see this is the width of the whole cut off the fold. It's about 1/16 of an inch. Be as stingy as you can, and that's both sides of the fold. So basically, think an eyelash. Think I'm going to cut off as much as my eyelash is wide, and you won't go wrong. Okay, so you take that, you press it open, and you're going to apply your strip. Now here's my strip. It's a straight strip. I would put the same dots of glue down this seam, both sides, this side and this side. And with your tip, you can have a lot of control. You're going to be opening up your basted seam. It's going to go away. And so you don't want your glue to be anywhere near the middle of that. You want it to be as close as you can get to the edge on the outside without going over. If you go over, it doesn't really matter because you can wash the glue out. But to hold the strip, it needs to be on the seam allowance as close as you can get to the edge. Not a lot, about 1 inch apart is fine. Then you take your strip and you press it down. With your iron, you heat set the glue, and it's great. Then you're going to sew it in. All right, let's see. I might have to glue that, we'll see. Okay, so upside down, this has been glued on. You see ghost dots of the glue, maybe. When you're going to sew it, hold it up by the seam allowances. And there's a dark blue line, which is laying right inside the fold, which might be a little hard to see with my camera. But I'm going to sew right next to the basting line. To do that, I'm going to put my zipper foot on the machine, and I'm going to guide down the basting line. And with this zipper foot, the new line of stitches is going to go in this hole. The needle goes in the hole of the presser foot, and my stitches are going to be 1/16 of an inch away from my original basted seam. Then you turn it over the other way. The same thing on the other side. On this side, the stitches I'm putting in are blue. My basting stitches are green. And then you're going to take the basting stitches out, which I will not do all of it right now, but it's very easy. Just take out a few, grab hold of it and pull, and they will all come out. Then on the front, this is glue. So on the front, take water, spray water down the front. You're going to very gently ease these pieces apart and press it with an iron. You can turn it over and go back. I haven't done it yet, but you can go back, and with your rotary, it's very easy to reduce those seam allowances to 1/4 of an inch, and you're in business to keep going. Now, can we do a curve on this? Yes, we can do a curve. Stephanie does not tell you in her directions how to do a curve, so you have to figure it out. You want to put a curve in, and your first step is to fold your fabric where you want the curve. Well, of course, you can't do that. So what you're going to do is take your rotary cutter, and you're going to cut a curve open. Then the next thing you do is you're going to baste that same curve back together. And I'm kind of a chicken on basting curve things. So I will start right here, and I will very carefully baste this end close to that end. And then I'm going to turn it over. And I'm going to start again in the middle, and I'm going to baste this down. There are some people who can zip right through these things one end to the other. I'm not one of those people. So whatever method you like to use will work. And you end up with a basted curve. The first thing I did with this was kind of instinctive. I saw this curve. It was wrinkly. I started clipping it, and then I thought, oh no, we don't want to clip it. Don't clip your curve. You're going to take a bias strip, stretchy bias. You're going to glue this down just like I said to do it on the other method. Glue this down over your seam allowances, and then you hold it up. You hold it up by your glued side, and you take your zipper foot and you sew along the seam just like you did on the one before. Both sides, spray it, pull it apart, and you end up with a pretty good curved seam. This is kind of wrinkly. I'm not worried about that. This background is, do you remember the old lady near Oak Ridge that gave us a whole lot of fabric last year? Some of that fabric was not very good quality, and so I used that to practice. So I think the wrinkles are from the not very good quality fabric. I'm very grateful to the woman for letting us have it. It's great for practice. Okay, the back of it is just the same. I have trimmed one side to 1/4 inch, but not the other. Does anybody have questions yet?
Yes. Hey, Audrey, could you please repeat whose technique this is?
This one is Stephanie Rule of Spontaneous Threads.
Okay.
We'll put all that in our document.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you. That was a question from Karen.
Okay, yeah, that's all going to be in the document. Okay, this is Stephanie's method. I thought, can we use it on a wider strip? If you wanted to have the accuracy, say you had an already made quilt, and Stephanie has used her method on several quilts that have won prizes in QuiltCon. Kelly, will we be able to put pictures of those on our blog in the password protected section? I'll ask them if you
Sure.
mind, so that we can see what it looks like if you want to get really fancy and use it in a quilt. She has literally cut apart some quilts and that are already pieced all the way pieced together and put insets inside them, and it's very pretty. It was a really nice technique. Yes, you can do this with a wider strip. This is a little bit more than 1/4 inch. It's the exact same method, but what I did when I basted, I gave myself more room. So, because when you're going to pull the thing apart and leave a whole 1/4 inch, you need to have a little more room on your outsides. But yes, you can use this for a wider seam with a wider seam allowance. The last thing I'm going to show you, and I'm not going to show you in great detail because it takes a long time. This is Kathleen Loomis. She blogs at Art with a Needle. She is an art quilter. I think she's a Sakwa art quilter. She is not a modern quilter. She is not on Instagram. So you have to find her in her blog. She has developed a mess. She makes art quilts that look like maps and grids. If you're familiar, excuse me, with Carolyn Friedlander's fabric, she may have called it the cattle yard. It has lines going in all directions, kind of like this. I used her cattle yard fabric as inspiration when I was doing this piece, which I've cut apart into several sections to sew back together. But you can put lines going in any directions, and these are in fact slightly curved. So you've got a lot of possibility with this technique. And so as I told you at the very beginning of her technique is she starts out, you will lose a lot of background fabric if you want to play this game. So start with a large piece, much larger than you want to end up. Lost my light. Sew or mark with your favorite marking tool a double line across the top of your piece and a single line on any adjacent edge. I marked the left one because I'm right-handed. This is your map for how you're going to press everything you put in the whole time. You just need thin strips because your strips are going to be 1/8 of an inch. When Kathleen works, she ends up with seam allowances that are about 1/8 of an inch. If her quilts are going on the wall, so it's not a problem. If you want to do this technique in a quilt that's not going on the wall, you're going to want to use 1/4 inch seam allowances. I did that here. It works fine. You will have bulk. There's no way around it. Okay. So first, she has an order in her slicing method or her layering method. It's slice and insert. I sliced. I've got a 5/8 inch strip. I'm going to insert it. She does everything in order, right over left. So you lift your right piece up. That's wrong. And you flip it. Sorry, I've got a sign on the top. Flip it over, and you're going to sew this seam first. Then you gently pull this out. Do not press in between. She's very specific about that. And then you layer the right piece over the left piece. And that way it's really easy to keep your tops at the top, and it's easier to not distort your little strip because you're not going to press it until it's sewn in. Once it is sewn in, you are going to press it. I pressed it open just so you can see how it looks. This is a little more than a 1/16 and a little less than an 1/8. So you can get very, very thin. I'd have the back side trimmed, and it's pressed open. Do not press it open if you're going to put in a lot. In hers, you always press away from one of your guidelines. So for a vertical seam, everything gets pressed that way. For a horizontal seam, everything gets pressed that way. So you're always pressing across and down. And once you get more than 2 things in, we'll go back to this one last time. Everything is pressed that way or this way. And so when you're going to sew in the next thing, you don't have to worry about which way you left your seam allowances because they're going to consistently be in the right place. And you can sew right over them without them flipping and going back in the other direction. I think that's all I have to tell you.
Well, that was wonderful. Clap, clap, clap. Thank you so much for all of your work on that. Woo.
You are welcome. I think it would have been easier in person, but we do what we must.
Yeah, but now we're going to have it forever.
That's true.
It's going to be online forever.
That's true. I'm not ever going to watch it.
Well, you should. It was awesome.
I'll watch Kelly's.
We've got some claps from people on here.
Yay. Thank you. Thank you.
Let's see. A bunch of people are clapping. I guess you can see that now that you're not.
Man, now that I'm not a nervous wreck, now I can have fun.
Nervous wreck. You did great. What are you talking about? Okay. All right. Does anybody have any questions that you want answered? We'll give you just a minute to type those in before we move on to Kelly. We should have some music in the background.
We should.
Okay. Patricia needs a one.
We can do that. We can do that.
That'll be fun. When we can get back together, we'll all have to put on our little face masks that we've all been sewing and do an inset strips day. I think that would be awesome. Okay, now we'll get started with Kelly. Did you mute yourself, Kelly?
I did. I am muted myself.
Here we go.
Hi,
Here
everybody.
comes Kelly. Hold on. There you go.
Hi. So Audrey talked with you about sewing inset strips. I'm going to talk about sewing inset shapes. That can be anything from a circle to an organic amoeba looking thing. It can be fully contained in the background fabric if you want, or it can go off the sides, and I'm going to show you all of that. Pat Barber asked, so you don't worry about the glue, or do you always rinse it out? And I'll answer for me, and I think Audrey is pretty much the same. Audrey said she sprays her seams after she sews them. That Elmer's glue will come out pretty quick. All you need to do is just spray some water on it, and you can kind of just wipe it off. Also, if you're feeling really brave and you have pre-washed your fabric, you could soak your blocks, you could soak your top, you could do that before you quilt or after, it all depends. And that will lead to my point, Candace. If you want to pull up my cutting mat shot, I'll talk to you guys a little bit about glue. Basically, I am going to advocate, Audrey and I use Elmer's glue, but I would say experiment and find a glue that works for you. This is a glue that I've used before called Aptly glue. It is permanent. So once you heat set it with your iron, it's pretty hard to get the two fabric pieces to come apart. It's pH neutral. There's a couple of features about it. that people who applique really like. Another one is Soline. This is a glue stick applicator instead of liquid glue. So do some experiments. Do some experiments with leaving the glue in. Some people have really strong opinions about using glue or any kind of adhesives. It's up to y'all. So the other tools that I like to use, Audrey mentioned marking tools. I use either water-soluble ink or air-soluble ink, and these are both Dritz fine point pens. I have found that these are the only ones that don't leave any marks when I'm finished with them. Every other brand that I've tried leaves shadows or something. And I also like these Karen K. Buckley scissors. For this method, you are going to want to have some tiny scissors that are pretty sharp. And I like these because they have a serrated edge. But find the tools that work for you, and you'll be all set. So a couple different methods for sewing inset shapes. You have a freehand method, which is the one that I tend to use the most. It's good for single use if you just want to do insert a shape one time, or for improvisational shapes. A second method that a lot of people use is the freezer paper method. If you have ever Googled the 6-minute circle, number one, you will know if you've tried to sew it that it does not take 6 minutes, but you will also know that it uses freezer paper. So freezer paper is good if you want to make multiple blocks using the same shape. A third and final, not final, there's probably other methods, but a third method that I have learned and tried is using a ruler and pins. So there are quilters out there who will use a curves ruler, a curvy ruler. Sometimes it's a drunkard's path, or maybe it's a full circle. They will use rulers, cut out their shapes, and then using pins, they will sew those shapes back together. That is not my preferred method, so I'm not going to show that to you today. But if you try the freehand, or if you try freezer paper and those aren't for you, maybe ruler and pins is for you. So keep all of that in mind as we go along. I'm going to start by showing you some examples of things that you can sew with this method. This is a simple circle set into some background fabric, and you can see this is what it looks like on the back. This is an organic shape, kind of maybe an eggplant or a gourd, if you will. This is another example of something that you can sew. It's fully contained in the background fabric. And there's the back side. You can also, when you're doing inset shapes, you're going to find yourself with a lot of scraps. And so sometimes I like to use those scraps and put some more inset shapes in there. So here's a circle. Inset inside my little gourd scrap. That could be appliqued onto something or set into something if you choose. And here's an example of shapes that are not fully contained by the background. Both of these bleed off the edge, and there are some pretty intense curves here. This is a pretty tight curve. That is something that would be very difficult to sew if you were using the cut it apart, stick the right sides together and sew it back together method, which is why we don't do that. I'm going to show you how glue basting your curve can really make this easy. And here's a look at the back. One of these I clipped, the other one I didn't. Doesn't really appear to make much of a difference on the front. They both look pretty good. Any questions from looking at samples? Are we good? I'm going to move forward. So this is how I'm going to show you how I would sew an inset circle. And if everything goes correctly, I'm actually going to sew it for you live. So say a prayer right now that all of our appendages will come out from this. But here's how I would sew an inset circle. And the same method can be used to sew that gourd or any kind of curvy organic shape that you want. So I always start by taking my background fabric and drawing the shape on it. So hopefully y'all can see there's a blue line here that I drew with my water-soluble pen.
Yes, we can see that.
Perfect. And that is going to be step 1. Having to find places to ditch my samples. Step 2, and Audrey talked about this a bit Step 2, I sew stay stitches just on the inside of that line that I drew. And it's really hard for you to see the blue line here, but it's maybe a thread's width to the inside of that blue line. That's where I sewed my stay stitches. And as Audrey mentioned, more so with curvy shapes than with lines, you might get some puckering depending on the tension of your machine. You know, anytime you sew through one layer of fabric instead of two, sometimes it can be a little puckery. So like she said, you can always take your seam ripper and just nick a couple of the threads. I also give it a good press with my iron, and that seems to help everything lay flat. But these stay stitches serve a couple of purposes. Because you're sewing a curvy shape, I see a question. Is there a specific stitch length for this process? No, I tend to use a regular size stitch that I would use to sew a seam. So maybe a 2 on my Juki or a little bit higher, just depends. I leave these stitches. So again, experiment and decide what you like. I always leave these here. So if this is a quilt that you really care about, if it's a show quilt, you might want to use thread that matches your fabric, but using a contrasting thread will really help you out later in the process. And so I'll get to that in just a second. So once I have drawn my shape and sewn my stay stitches, I cut the shape out. And I do this freehand with a rotary cutter. You can do it with scissors. You can do it however you want, but you're going to cut. This is your seam allowance here. This little bit of fabric on the inside of those stay stitches, that will eventually be my seam allowance. The next step in the process is pressing your seam allowance back. So I have, and I didn't mention this earlier, I drew my blue line on the back, on the wrong side of the fabric. Because this is solid, it doesn't really matter, but if you had a print that you were using, I would draw the shape on the back side. You can also draw it on the front. It works either way, but sometimes it helps to do it on the back. And once I have cut my seam allowance, then it's actually time to take these tiny little scissors that I told you I liked and clip that seam allowance. And y'all can see here, I think hopefully pretty well, these clips are about 1/4 of an inch apart. It's not very scientific. I just go along and clip. You want to make sure that you don't clip through your stay stitches. I stay probably 2 or 3, maybe even 4 threads widths away from those stay stitches. If you are doing a very tight curve, you might want to put those clips even closer together. But you're gonna clip and then you're gonna press these back. And so I like to take my fingers and give these kind of a little finger press. And the reason I like these stay stitches is I can see visually how far back I need to press this. So I press this so that the stay stitches I sewed are on the back side. They're going to be hidden within the seam allowance once I sew these all together. And so I'll give them I'll go probably all the way around the shape, give it a good finger press, and then I will take my iron and give it a little press. And that just helps keep the shape consistent, keeps those edges nice and smooth. And here's an example of what happens if you make clips that are too big. This sample, I'll show you the backside in a second here, but this is not a very pretty circle. You can see some rough kind of straight edges here. And that's because these clips, they're about half an inch apart, maybe even 3/4 of an inch, some of these, where it's really rough on the front. So you can see if you don't clip small enough, your curve is not going to be very curvy. It's going to be a little wonky. So smaller curves are better. Once I have all of those pressed back, this is what it looks like. And it doesn't look perfect because I've had other fabric laying on it, but ideally you would want to see that white stay stitching all the way around the edge. If you have a print that you're going to set into that shape, it might help. And let me see if I can do this accurately here live for y'all. If I turn off this light and turn on this light, might help to use a light box. So using a light box, I can kind of see exactly where that print is going to fall in that hole. And from here, I can say, yep, everything looks symmetrical. I like it there. And I can peel back one corner at a time. And I can use my glue. I'm not going to live glue for you like Audrey did, but I can use my glue and put little bits of dots, little dots on all of those clips, press it down with my hands, heat set it with my iron, press it with my iron. And that will ensure that if I want to fussy cut and set in a print, then everything will look pretty that way. But for the purposes of this demonstration, just so you can see a little bit easier, I've used a solid. So this is what it looks like on the back. I have pressed all my clips back. I've glued this piece of white fabric to the clips. And Candace, if you want to change over to the sewing machine, I will try my best to do a live demo here. Okay, so y'all can see Audrey talked about a zipper foot. This is the zipper foot that I like to use. And I'll put this fabric under here, maybe that'll make it a little easier to see. It is a very skinny zipper foot. It's adjustable. This is I sew on a Juki machine. So again, depending on what machine you have, experiment with feet that are available for your machine and find one that you like. It took me a while to get used to this skinny zipper foot. And if I'm sewing a strip, an inset strip, I probably won't use it. I'll probably just use my regular presser foot. But I like that. I'm gonna have to move this other computer out of the way.
Hey, Kelly.
For a second. Yeah.
How much larger should the inset be cut?
You want it to cover the seam allowance that you've pressed back. So in a second here, I'll show you on this. I mean, you can see right there on the edge, it just goes beyond the seam allowance, the tan seam allowance that I have cut. That's because I'm trying to not have a lot of fabric waste, but it's up to you. As long as it covers the whole hole and you can glue it to the back, you should be fine. But I was saying the reason I like this skinny zipper foot is because when you're sewing a curve, anybody who's sewn a drunkard's path will know that sometimes, depending on the presser foot you're using, even if there isn't a pucker in the fabric, even if your stitches are all nice and neat, sometimes because your presser foot has kind of squashed that background fabric as you've sewn that nice pretty curve, it can be hard to press those little, I don't know, permanent kind of, they seem permanent, they're not really, but it can be hard to press those little bumps out of your background fabric. So I like to use this zipper foot, which keeps it off this background fabric. And what I'm gonna do, and it's hard to see here, but what I'm doing is just on the inside of my stay stitches, maybe 1 or 2 threads to the inside of my stay stitch. So here's my white stay stitch here. Hopefully y'all can see that a little bit. Just to the inside of that, where that crease is where I'm going to be sewing. And so I have put my needle down where I want it to go. And if all goes well, I don't sew over my finger live on this video. So I'm going to go very slowly. And I used, for this circle, I have it set to a pretty small stitch right now. It's probably unnecessarily small for this size circle. If you are sewing a smaller circle, I'm going to say this one is maybe 4 inches, 3 to 4 inches wide. If you're sewing a smaller circle, the smaller the stitch, the better, but use a stitch length that's comfortable for you to go around the curve. And basically all I'm doing is a little bit at a time. I'm pulling this background fabric out of the way, just like you would a drunkard's path. Trying not to go too fast. And I'm just sewing along the inside of the line here. Does anybody have any questions as I sew?
Not at the moment. Hold on.
Okay.
No, not at the moment.
Do I need to sew this whole thing? I think y'all kind of get the point. I'll go all the way around just because we have time. Oh, I see a question popped up.
Yeah, what is the tool in your right hand?
This is a stylus that Jean made for me. Some people use a purple thing or a toothpick. This is a darning needle that has been set into some Fimo clay. And it just helps. I like to use it just to kind of, instead of my fingers, I feel like I can get right up there next to that needle and just control all the fabric exactly how I want to. Is that another question that popped up there? I just keep getting like little.
Nope.
Okay, it's hard to tell on my phone. I'm sewing, y'all can't see this, but I am sewing with a gooseneck phone holder and my phone in between my hands right now. So I keep getting a tiny picture of what I'm doing on the phone in front of me, which is a little unusual. In real life, I would probably sew this a lot faster. Oh, we're getting close to where I started. Okay, so I'm just coming back around to the stitches where I started, and I'm gonna run over those and back tack a little bit just to make sure that they're all in there nice and tight. And we're done. So I'm gonna take this over to the cutting mat. Candace, if you wanna change to that camera. And this is what it'll look like when you're done sewing. So as you can see, that zipper foot really helped. Like there aren't any really nasty permanent press marks there, which is nice. And so what I tend to do before I press this, I will take a rotary cutter, which I am not confident enough to do that on camera. But I would take a rotary cutter and cut this excess and cut it so that your seam allowance is about 1/4 inch. And again, depends on how precise you want to be. I kind of just eyeball it and go and call it a day. And once you've done that, then I kind of give it a nice finger press on the front again, and then I'll take it and iron it and it'll be nice and pretty. And something that I forgot to mention when I started, but that you can kind of see will be key to all of this is I start with background fabric that is bigger than I want my finished piece to be. If you want something that unfinished before you sew together is an 8-inch square, I would start with a 9-inch square just so you have plenty of room to cut any excess off and trim it up before you sew this block or whatever you're sewing into the final quilt. And you can see, maybe you can see, hopefully y'all can see if my camera is close enough. You can see the line of stay stitches, and just inside it is the line of real stitches that are holding these two pieces of fabric together. And so because it's in the seam allowance, I just leave those and I never take them out. If you want, you could take them out. It's up to you. So that's the freehand method. The next method that I talked about is freezer paper. It will use a template like this. If you were sewing a circle, I would make a template using freezer paper. And something that I have learned over the years, I think it was Carol Wileshaw who had a blog post that will be linked. I've linked to her tutorial in the document that we're going to send y'all and post on the blog. But she uses, she takes 3 pieces of freezer paper. She shrinks each one individually. So something that people may or may not know is when you take a piece of freezer paper and you touch it with your iron, it's going to shrink a little bit. And so to make everything pretty and perfect, like this is what would happen if you take 3 pieces of freezer paper. It's hard to see. And kind of press them all together.
That one's a little hard to see.
Yeah, it's hard to see. I can't get the angle just right, but it's real wrinkly and fussy. And so if you take each individual piece and you shrink it individually, and then you stack them on top of each other and iron them together, it'll be nice and smooth. You'll have a nice smooth surface. And then when I say shrink freezer paper, basically all you have to do is take your paper, put it on your ironing board, and iron it. I just iron it onto my ironing board. And because it's freezer paper, it will come right up, and then it'll still have enough tack and sticky to stick to the other pieces of freezer paper. So that's what I would do for that. So I've got my template, and instead of This is the example I showed last. Instead of drawing the circle and sewing stay stitches, for this method, you're just going to take your freezer paper template, and this is just a single piece of paper for the example purposes, but I would do this. You're going to take your template and you're going to press it with your iron. You're going to press it onto your fabric. And so these two things are married. They are sticky. They're sticking to each other. And from here, you're not going to sew any stay stitches. What you're going to do, you're going to cut your center circle out. So you've got your seam allowance there. And that template, those 3 layers of paper is going to give you a nice hard edge to then take. Again, I do fingers first. Take my fingers and I kind of finger press it back so that I know everything is nice and pretty. And once you've got all of that pressed back, you can, I would take your glue the dots, stick your background fabric on top, and only then, once you've done that, you're going to peel it off. And it's a little tricky. You're going to peel that freezer paper off, and then you're basically going to have, well, I sewed the circle, but you're going to have this without it being sewn. It'll be stuck together. You won't have the stay stitches to use as a guide of where to sew. You're just going to have to sew in the crease. Excuse me, I'm going to cough here for a second. But you're just going to sew in that crease. So depending on the fabric you're using, sewing in that crease might be difficult. If you're using black fabric or dark fabric or something that has a really intense print, it might be kind of hard to see that crease. And that's why I kind of prefer using the stay stitch method. It just gives you something that's a little easier to see. Any questions about that? Freezer paper method. I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can sew non-circle shapes with the same method. Any questions? Doesn't look like it. So say you want to sew a shape that's not a circle. Same method applies. I drew a line here in dark black ink. You can see that. Hopefully my camera is not super clear. Does it look clearer to y'all or is it blurry?
It does not look clear to me. No.
Well, that's a bummer.
That's my internet connection or your internet connection.
Might be mine. Well,
but it was clear to begin
see
with, so that's why I think it's a connection issue.
Yeah, I'm putting this internet through a lot of work with multiple devices loaded up on Zoom.
But I do see
but anyway,
line.
You're gonna draw. Yeah, you're gonna draw your shape. You're gonna sew your stay stitches just on the inside. You're gonna cut the shape out, press your seam allowance back, and do the same thing. Glue a piece of fabric onto this and sew it. You can also use this method. I just drew a line again because you all can see it well enough, I think, there. If you want to sew a curve like this, I draw a line. I will probably sew some stay stitching maybe 1/4 of an inch away, maybe just under 1/4 of an inch away from that line. So I would sew my stay stitches up here, and then I would cut this line. And then you can press that line back. I didn't even put any rotary cutters anywhere near me because I didn't want to do that while I was on camera. But you could cut this line and press that seam allowance back following your stay stitching that you sewed. And then take that, you're going to press it back just like you press the circle back. You're going to add some glue. And then you can just take that and place it anywhere that you want to on the quilt that you're working on.
Hey, Kelly, we do have a question. Where did you put the glue?
Yes.
Where did you put the glue on this method?
Martha, are you asking about the fabric that's right here in front of me? Because it's a little, I didn't put any glue here. It's hard to see because I didn't actually tell y'all. Hold on.
Here we go. Martha, you can talk. Oh, wait, unmute. Well, it's not letting me do it.
Okay. Well, I'm going to assume that maybe it's this example. So what I would do, I'm going to cut this curve, keeping my fingers well away. That would be cut better. I would trim this line. And in real life, there would be some stay stitches less than 1/4 of an inch away from here. So I would be trimming up to those stay stitches and then pressing those back. You can press, once this is clipped, you can press that whole curve back. And that's where I would put the glue in this method. You're basically just going to put it in the seam allowance, just like you would do if you were sewing a circle. And once that's pressed back and you've got glue on it, you can press, you can flip it over if you want and kind of lay it in place. And then I kind of maybe stick the glue underneath and go a little bit at a time. I hope that answers Martha's question. I know it's a little tricky. But that will allow you to do real steep curves. And Pat Barber, I know you talked last meeting about having some issues sewing some long, kind of lengthwise, horizontal, curvy lines. Depending on how tight the curve is, I might use this method for that. Just depends. But I think that is all I have to talk about. So key things to keep in mind. Start with background fabric that is larger than your final desired size. Sew stay stitches along that inside of your drawn line. The more clips that you cut in that seam allowance, the better, smoother curve you're going to have. And experiment with your presser feet. You might find that a skinny zipper foot works for you. You might find that the regular presser foot works just fine for you. Pat asks, when you do curves, should you use bias strips? It depends. Like when that curve that I've cut on my cutting mat, it is, because it's a curve, like it's kind of biasy in there. It's curvy, so it depends. I generally don't specifically use bias strips. When you're doing Audrey's inset strip method, if you are insetting then I would definitely use bias fabric there. It's going to be easier to get that curve to go. But if you are doing some improvisational curves like the one that I just showed, I don't think it really matters. You might have to cut more clips in to get it to behave. You might have to cut some wedge-shaped clips instead of just straight clips like I showed. It just depends. Any other questions?
Oh, I don't see any.
I think we might be okay. And I'll say, Candace mentioned this, but Audrey and I have put together a Google Doc. It shares some of my favorite tips. It shares a list of the tools that I like to use, and it has a link to several different tutorials for y'all to try. It has a link to a freehand method. It has a link to the freezer paper method. It has a link to someone who likes to use a ruler and pins. So there are plenty of ways to experiment and find a method that works for you.
All right, thank you, Kelly. That was amazing. I'm gonna.
Welcome.
A lot of us are gonna be inserting some shapes. If you haven't finished your challenge quilt,
it's one of those things that.
What was that?
That's right. You could definitely put inset strips in your challenge quilt, and it's one of those things. It takes practice. The more practice, the more times you do this, the better you're going to get. And the more times I do it, every time I try it, I find a different little tweak or technique in my method that I find works best for me. So just keep doing it, and hopefully it'll get easier.
Okay, we're going to turn your camera off now. All right, that was awesome. Let's see, we got a question in. Karen asked, how do we access the Google Docs by Kelly and Audrey?
That will be posted in the member resources area of our blog. So guests, I'm sorry if you are not a member, you do not have access to that. But we're going to post that Google Doc there, and we will also post a link to this video, hopefully, so that you can go back and rewatch this if you need to. That will be posted there as well.
Okay. The camera switched to you just as you finished talking. Okay. Now
Oh, that's okay.
Now I'm going to try and give people access to do a show and tell. So let's start. Martha, I've already got you. I can unmute Martha, but it doesn't show me where I can share her video. I've made her a panelist. Let's see, let's try somebody else. Let's try Karen. Promote to panelist. Okay, she's there. Ask to start video. Okay, for Karen's, I get to ask to start video. And you're unmuted, Karen.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah, it did a weird thing. It sort of flipped back to a panel that just said Zoom, you know, kind of like it turned off and turned back on.
Yeah, it took you off of the attendee and put you as a panelist. So now I'm going to make your video live.
Mm-hmm.
Are you ready?
You're making my, oh, hello.
Yeah, it's a little odd.
I don't want to look at myself. Make me go away.
Do you have any show and tells?
Oh, that's weird. That's kind of like you could just come right into my house. I do not have any show and tells. I'm sorry. I do have several quilts. I've quilted for some of you. The other, there's a Candy, you know, I don't think she is on.
She is
today,
not.
And Sarah Bradshaw's, and I'm going to be calling them, I'm going to be calling and trying to get them to let me ship them just so I can get them out of my house. So, no, I do not have any show and tells.
Okay. Okay.
Unless I show you Candy's quilt.
I'm sure she wouldn't mind. Uh-oh, what have I done? Okay. There. Okay. Now, let's see who else we can get on here. Let's see.
I had a, y'all can hear me but not see me. I have in the
Yes.
chat, I asked people in the chat to say if they have something so you know who to turn on and who to turn off.
Okay. Oh, I
People
see.
who are willing to be on camera. Audrey. Yeah, Audrey has something.
Okay, well, Audrey's already up here. Let me just make you
I'm
live.
not sure who that is.
Okay, that should spotlight. Hold on. We got to unmute you. Let's see. Is she muted? There you go. Now talk.
Well, since I have 3 devices, we don't want anything to start screaming.
True.
Okay, so I think that you've unmuted this one of me under the line.
The one that
Okay,
your face.
so I'm gonna have to carry. We've been through this before, but now it's
Yes.
actually put together. If we had my phone, I think you could see all of it. Let's see. Can you see all of it?
Almost. We're missing a little
That's
bit.
the top.
That looks so good. Wow.
So if you see the geese ring at the top,
Yes.
that was inserted like a combination of my lines and Kelly's shapes. I think that's, you know, it's 5.5 by 7.5, so it's kind of big, and it's kind of hard for me to figure out how to show things that are that big.
Yeah, no, that was good. That's awesome. It's starting to look less like a board game and more like just a really nice quilt.
Thanks.
Okay. Now we have JMS. Let's make her promote to panelist, so bear with us.
How we all got promoted?
Yeah. Let's see. Okay.
Can you hear me and see me?
I
You
can
don't get
hear
any
you.
money though, Karen,
This
so
is
don't
Vivian.
ask.
Hold on. I'm gonna ask to start video. Get a message.
There it is.
Yay! Let me make
I'm
you.
Vivian Barker from Dunlap.
Hold on. I'm making you
I'm
big.
using using
Oh,
my
there
school
you go.
computer because yeah, you did. Woo. My home computer wouldn't take it, but I've been doing the Alice stitch along. These are 4-inch blocks
Oh wow!
that I have been doing, and
Ooh,
this
love
is
those colors.
all foundation paper piecing. Free Spirit. This is probably my favorite one.
Wow, that is so cool.
And again, this is Allison Glass and Juicy's stitch along. And it's an 8-week series. And then at the end of the series, you have to formulate an end quilt. This is a lazy log cabin. These are like 3/16 of an inch. These strips here are. And then I did this where I framed it, paper piecing.
Oh, nice.
So that's what I've been doing during this quarantine.
Yeah, paper piecing. Love it. Paper piecing's my
It's been a
favorite.
lot of fun.
Yeah, that is awesome.
I love it.
Well, I can't wait to see
You got
that
me
put
started
together.
with that peacock.
Oh yeah,
We had
yeah.
a lot of fun.
Did you? Oh, the peacock was
Thanks. Me
the best I
neither.
ever made. It's my favorite. My little peacock.
Wow. Well, I've got the peacock. I've got the body done, and I finally have the feathers organized. I just haven't done them yet.
Okay. I like that one because it's the pieces are so big you can
That's all.
whip out a quilt really quick.
They are.
And once you take the paper out,
Yes,
you know,
they
that'll
are.
be super easy. Okay. Well, good job.
And some of these are using the poly stabilizer, so I don't have to rip anything out.
Oh,
This
nice.
I don't have to rip out at all.
Oh, that's good. Okay, we have questions. Okay, who are you learning from?
Okay. Well, you started me with paper piecing, but this has just been trial and error through Allison Glass and Juicy Juice webpage. They
Okay.
have a stitch along for the 8-week challenge,
Okay.
and it's ALISON, and she's on Instagram as well.
Yes.
I bought these patterns from Mountain Creek in Greenback, Tennessee. They've got them online.
Now repeat that again. You broke up just a little bit.
I bought the patterns from Mountain Creek Quilt Shop in Greenback, Tennessee.
Okay.
And
Awesome.
it's just an 8-week stitch along.
Great. Yeah, I heard you that time. Awesome. Is that all you have for us?
Okay. That's it. That's it so far.
Okay, great. Now we are going to go to Janet. Let me make you. Now, this takes just a minute, so I'm going to promote you to the panelist. And you should pop up here. Here she comes. Unmute. Let's see here. Wait, hold on. Okay. Where?
Candace, while you're working on that, Kay had a question that I think is for Vivian that says, what is the poly stabilizer?
Oh, okay. Let me. Where did she go?
I will have to check and get back with you. It's up to you.
Okay. Maybe shoot us an email. That'd be great. Maybe shoot us an email.
I will. I will.
Okay, good. Okay. Oh, there we go. Unmute Janet. I see you. I'm about to make you live. There you go. Yay.
Here I am.
Hey.
Hello. Yeah, well, so
Oh, wow. Flying geese.
this is a quilt,
Beautiful.
flying geese, that I probably pieced 10 years ago,
Oh, wow.
and finally pulled it out and quilted it. So
So that's been a long work in progress.
one. Oh yeah, I have a lot of quilt tops. Somehow when I get finished with the quilt tops, getting it on the machine to quilt seems to take a while.
Yeah.
This is one that I've got ready to quilt, and it was a freebie pattern that I picked up at QuiltCon, and I just loved it. I don't know if I can get it up here where you can see it.
Oh, wow. Yes. Did you just
These
post
are bees.
Instagram? I just saw that on Instagram.
No, I haven't posted it.
That's
Somebody
beautiful.
else probably did it.
And the bottom is,
I don't know. I may
is
have,
the-
I don't know. I may have-
there we go. And the bottom is a B too, right?
Yeah, it's 2 bees. And then one more that I don't have ready to quilt yet, but this was a 100 blocks in 100 days quilt.
Yes. Beautiful. Love those colors.
So
It looks like Kelly's favorite yellow.
someday it will get quilted. But that's it.
Awesome. Those are great. Good job. Let's see. Okay. Let me mute her. And next is Patricia. Let's get you going here. Promote to panelist. Okay. I'm going to go ahead. Let's see. Ann Hurley, you're after her. Let me go ahead and make you a panelist too. Okay, Patricia, here you come. Ask to start video. Unmute. Okay, I'm going to make you live now. Hold on just a second. There we go.
Hey,
Hey, you're
how
live.
is everybody?
Good, how you doing?
Okay, this good. This is a free download pattern that I got from Buttermilk Basin.
Oh, beautiful. Now, is that what you've been doing in your quarantine
I just
time?
used. Yes, that's one of them. And then
Nice.
here's another one that I quit some time back. I won't show the whole thing, but I tried to do the sort of like free motion.
Yes. Did you use your domestic on that? That looks really good.
I did. I think I used, I forgot the foot. I think it's outlined or something. I forgot the name of the foot. I'll have to let you know that. But
Yeah.
I had a lot of fun doing that and was able to get a lot of different quilting in there.
Good.
So, and made a few masks. So
Yeah, I think we all have made a few masks.
that's it.
Okay, great. Well, it's good to see you.
See you
I'm gonna-
too.
I'm going to try to turn at the very end, turn everybody on and then turn it back to gallery mode so we can all see each other. I think that'd be fun.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. I'm muting you now, and now I'm going to unmute Anne and make her live. Here you go.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hi. I I made a t-shirt quilt, which has already been given for a graduation gift just
Oh,
this
okay.
year. I mean, just this past week. So I sent the photographs to Candace, and maybe she can post them or add them to the review of the blog.
Yes, I can do that. Or
I'm like everyone else. I've been finishing up some projects and doing a few masks, but not many, and just doing some dyeing, that kind of thing.
okay.
Great program today, by the way.
Yes, agreed. Here's the quilt. Here's the t-shirt quilt. Can y'all see that?
Yeah.
That's great. And we can see it.
Very nice.
Thanks, Candace.
Well, you're welcome. Sorry I didn't get it. There you go. Now you're live again.
That's it for me.
All right. Well, I look forward to seeing what you're dyeing. That's going to be exciting.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to make me the presenter now. Spotlight. Okay, who else do we have? Fantastic. Okay. Do we have any more show and tells? I don't see any. Let's see, I'm just going to go down to the very bottom. Any more? Okay, I'm going to start making you all panelists. Oh, wait, that's. And this is going to take just a second.
Can you hear me?
Yes, who just said that?
This is Vivian. It's called Ricky Tim's Stable Stuff Poly. And you can run it through your and everything. And I put that in the comments as well.
Okay, now I've got to, let's see, you're all here. Now I've got to ask you all if you want to share your video. Let's see, unmute. Kathy, I just unmuted you. Let's see, I'm unmuting you all just as fast as I can.
Hi.
Hey. Okay.
Hi, everybody.
Hey.
Hi, everybody.
Love seeing all these
Hi,
faces.
everybody.
Hi,
I
Jean.
know. I really wanted to
Hi.
see everybody.
Hello.
Hi.
I can only see me.
We've got 2 pages of people.
You might have to change the setting on your computer, Jean, to show gallery.
Yeah, where's the here's gallery.
Thank you.
Okay, it's good to see
Yeah, if you want to see
everybody.
everyone's faces, click gallery view.
There we go.
People. Now you can all talk, I believe. If you can't talk, send me
Hey.
thing in the questions and I'll, let's see, Donna, let me unmute you.
Sarah.
Uh-oh.
Hi, Kathy Cook.
Looks like Martha Griffin might still be muted also.
Hi, Jean.
Unmute. Okay, Martha,
How
I just
are you,
unmuted you.
Jean?
I'm good.
Yeah, I did. Good. It's good to see you.
Yeah.
Well, don't everybody talk at once.
Thank you, Kelly and Audrey. That looked like
I thought you did a wonderful job. It's the first time I've ever understood how to insert things.
Good.
Good.
Yeah,
Hopefully,
both lessons were
we
really
had
good.
planned on
That was a
having a
great
lot more. It was hard to do all the step outs to show you each individual step without showing it to you in person. And I know that Audrey has worked really hard, and Candace and Karen helped us do a test run of this webinar, which took about an hour. So thank you everybody for all of your work in making this happen. It was fun.
Yeah, no, thank you guys.
I'd like to say thank you for
Really
letting
good
me
meeting.
visit. It was a real treat.
Oh yeah, it's great to have you, Kathy.
I always hoped I'd get a visit the Chattanooga Modern Guild.
Yeah, and here you are. That's what I love about online.
I know.
Okay, does anybody have any questions or comments or thoughts about the video?
I liked it because we could see everything really well. I was going to say I really liked the presentation because we could see them really well. It was almost better than being in the room.
It really is in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
Right, because you don't have to worry about being in the back. Everybody got a front row view.
Mm-hmm. We use one of those
Great
cameras
presentation,
in
everybody.
our live.
What was that, Kathy?
Say that again, Kathy.
I said the camera that Audrey was using, the document camera. We use those in our demonstrations when we have live meetings to demonstrate something. We use that and just project it up on the screen so everybody can see, because there are too many people to gather around. I really like it.
Right,
I
that's a
loved all
good
your
idea.
Yeah,
step
before
outs,
this
Audrey.
became
Really
a
good
virtual
job.
event. Yeah, Audrey and I talked about doing that. There's a device you can buy that will basically project your camera view from your phone or whatever device you want onto a screen. We talked about doing that when we were thinking about meeting live in person, but maybe when we can all get together again, we can do that. It's a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
Patty Ann asked, remind us how we'll be able to see this again. So this video has been recorded, much to Audrey's chagrin. And we're going to post a link in the member resource area of our site. So members, if you are a paid member, if your membership is in good standing, and you have forgotten the password to that, email the guild or email Candace and she can send you the password to get into that page. But the member resources page of our website will have a link to the video at some point. Give us a day at least to get it processed. And it'll also have a link to the document that Audrey and I mentioned.
Yes, now, Peggy, you're new to the guild. What do you think? Where do you live at?
Who's that? Are you talking to me?
Peggy, yeah. Isn't that your name?
Or, yes. Sorry, you broke up in the beginning, so I wasn't sure if you were
Oh,
talking
dear.
to me. I am right outside of Atlanta, in Marietta. So, and I have had like 2 years of concurrent surgery. So I just got my cast off last night, but I've been practicing this quarantine thing for a while. So, but my quilting's been my therapy. So, and I really enjoyed today. I learned a lot. So I've been following Kelly for a while and asked her if I could jump on. So thank you.
That's wonderful. That is wonderful. It's good to have you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, does anybody else have?
Yeah, and I'm
anything to say?
very bummed that I was just going to say, I'm really bummed that QuiltCon is not going to be in Atlanta this year. So my stepdaughter got married in Austin last year. Like I had planned to go, and then her wedding was a couple weeks before. So I was like, I can't come and go. And then it all got canceled. I ended up not being able to go. It was fine. But yeah, I'm excited to see what they do, what the Modern Quilt does virtually with it.
Yeah.
So
I think it'll be really nice. I really do. I'm also pretty,
Oh, interesting.
there's just so much already to be bummed about that I'm trying to focus on the
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it feels appropriate to mourn a little bit over that, but also I
Oh.
think making the decision so soon is going to be a good thing for them, because then now they have all this time to focus their efforts on making it an awesome virtual event.
Yeah.
So that'll be good.
And maybe this year, since there's not going to be any like restriction on space, maybe they'll take a lot more quilts this year for the show. So there's something. They'll just do a slideshow of quilts. I mean, I'll be making my yearly donation. We'll see what happens. Okay. Well, if nobody else has anything, that's all we have. I'm excited for next month's meeting.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
you.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
See everybody.
It was good to see everyone.
It was.
Take care.
You too. Okay, I'm going to close this and
Good
it'll
to see your
start.
face, Jean.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
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 Trying to find where to log out. There we go.
Not easy sometimes.
Okay, I'm going to close it.
Bye.
I don't know how to close. Oh, there it is.